Islam with the West. This film is being screened in the framework of an international conference which has been organized by the Vidal Sassoon Center for the Study of Antisemitism, of which I have the privilege to be the director. I will say a few words of introduction to this film. We will then screen it, and following that, we will invite our guest, distinguished guest, who has come a long way from Los Angeles, California, Nonie Darwish, who appears in the film, so you'll get to know her before she comes up here to speak. And she has a very extraordinary personal story, and I strongly recommend that you stay to listen to what she has to say, and that we can engage in a dialogue of questions and answers, because the message, not only of the film, but what she is bringing with her, is very important for us and very timely at this moment. The director of this film could not be with us. His name is Wen Kopping, and he is a South African who is well known for his film and television work in South Africa. He previously co-directed and edited a documentary film about Nelson Mandela, and similarly co-directed and edited a film called Relentless, The Struggle for Peace in the Middle East, which is about the failure of the Oslo Peace Accords. He sent me a message about an hour ago, which reads as follows. I wanted to wish you Atzlacha for tonight's screening and know that I am thinking of you. I wish I could have been there with you. The South African screening will be taking place at a cinema here in Johannesburg at exactly the same time. This film has been shown in the United States, and it has received some extremely positive reviews. It was also shown more recently in Canada, where the reaction was somewhat different, and perhaps Nonie will elaborate because she experienced that in Winnipeg. I would like to mention that the co-producer and co-writer of the film is here with us tonight, Rabbi Shaw, who is from London, Ontario, Canada. And he actually graduated cum laude from the University of Toronto, where he focused on the study of film. I actually first met Rabbi Shaw many years ago when he was looked like a young student to me. And he just read a book of mine which I think played some kind of a role in the background, in the theme of this film. Rabbi Shaw is currently the director of the program development for Honest Reporting, which is an organization based in California, I believe, which was the main force behind the making of this film. My own involvement in it I'll just very briefly mention, because it is part of the reason why the premiere is being screened here in the context of a conference which is not yet concluded. It will go on tomorrow, on antisemitism, multiculturalism, and ethnic identity. Many of the people in the audience have been participants in that conference. And I think this film belongs as an integral part in the debate that we have been having, the discussions we've been having over the last few days. The Vidal Sassoon Center and myself as an individual were involved in the making of this film. Initially, I was simply one of the people that was interviewed. I didn't really know, as so often happens when you're interviewed for a film, what exactly the producers and director had in mind, only in very general terms. And things evolved, took a course of their own. I had a lot of experience from my training in Great Britain with making and editing film documentaries. And eventually I became the scientific or historical advisor to the film and was involved in the editing of it. I think it is actually a film that is highly professional, and I don't want to anticipate anybody's reactions, but I can say that when I first saw it, even in the rough cut stage, when there was still a lot of work to be done, it is very powerful. It's not easy to digest. It's not a piece of entertainment, but it is extremely important. I think it's a wake-up call. We'll get into that later, but it's a wake-up call to tell people in the Western world and elsewhere, in the Arab world, here in Israel, that we are already in the middle of a war that goes very broadly by the name of jihad, but which this film gives content to. What does this really signify? And contrary to some reactions, which I'm sure will come up for discussion, it is certainly not a hate film, a film designed to turn people against Islam as a religion. It makes a distinction that was made in the course of our discussions today at the conference, made by Professor Bassam Tibi, a very distinguished scholar and authority on Islam, between Islam and Islamism, between Islam and militant and radical Islam, which I think has dragged the message and the name of Islam into disrepute and has done great damage, not only to the West and to Israel and Jews, but to Muslims themselves. So, without further ado, I think we will go to the screening of the film, and then I will invite Noni Darwish to come up, and I'll say a few words about her, and then she will speak. That is what she's been asked to do, and engage with you in a dialogue. Thank you.
Engages in hate speech against America.
America is a blackmailing state power until there is nobody in the planet out of its order. The new God of the planet, and Allah will destroy America.
Hamza's a speaker. He brainwashes people. He gets funded. He sends them to commit murder abroad.
Al-Mujahirun is a UK-based Islamic pressure group with offices in Pakistan. 25-year-old Abdul Salam grew up in London's Brick Lane. Now he's a recruiter for the Taliban.
What's your involvement?
First time I saw that on the big screen. But when I saw it for the first time on the small screen, first thing I said to my colleague Sarah Grosswald from the Sassoon Center was, I have to invite Noni Darwish to Israel to speak about it. It didn't take much time to see that among all the different voices, and there are a number of important Arab voices here, which I think for the first time present a picture that we never see of opposition, criticism, rejection of the danger and indeed the evil that is represented today, unfortunately, by radical Islam. Let me introduce to you now Noni Darwish. A few words about her beyond what was already said in the film. She lives today in Los Angeles. She came to the United States at the age of 30, but she grew up, as you understood from this film, she grew up in Egypt and in Gaza, which was then controlled by Egypt, and as you probably absorbed, her father headed the Egyptian military intelligence in Gaza, and indeed he was, we could say, assassinated, killed by Israeli commanders in 1956, shortly before the outbreak of the Sinai War. She was then 8 years old. So there is already that experience, and if she wishes, she may enlarge upon that. But I think the most important thing to know about Noni Darwish, beyond everything that is eloquently stated in the film, is that today she is an activist, an Arab activist, in a cause of peace and understanding, while looking realistically and directly at the problem that so many people in the West, and perhaps even in this country, are still in denial about. And she founded a forum on the internet of Arabs for Israel. Yes, Arabs for Israel. And that in itself, I think, will be seen, I hope, very much in the future, as a breakthrough, as something that is another voice, an alternative voice, and the kind of voice that represents a hope for the future. So she will now speak to you, and then we will have some questions and answers. Noni Darwish.
I want to thank you for inviting me to this wonderful conference where I learned a lot. We need to see more films like that. Hollywood needs to start producing films to show who the bad guys of today. We need to learn about the danger we're all facing wherever we may be. To raise our awareness to the danger of radical Islam. We, moderate voices of the Arab world, have to come out. We need to see ourselves in the mirror. And films like that raises our awareness and makes us see how the outside world is affected by the radical elements in our religion. Images like that and preaching in mosques like that when I was a child sounded normal to me. Because hatred, when it's said inside the mosque, the holiest of places, incitement and hatred and rage, it becomes normal, it becomes value, something that's inspiring to do. And I really feel very sorry for the many generations, the Arab generations of, who grew up with this hate. I lived on the southern border of Israel for 30 years. I was born and raised as a Muslim in Cairo, Egypt, and I grew up in the Gaza Strip, a time when President Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt was committed to unify the Arab world, destroy Israel, and stand up against Western interests around the world. In the 50s, my father headed the Egyptian military intelligence in Gaza, and he headed the Fidayeen operations against Israel. They made cross-border attacks into Israel and caused much damage, destruction, and death to civilians. In response to the terror, one night, Israeli commandos came into our heavily guarded home in Gaza City. And they only found my mother and us children. My father on that night happened to be in Cairo. They left us unharmed. The Israeli soldiers did not hurt us or kill us, even though the Fidayeen did kill Israeli women and children. In Gaza elementary schools, I learned hatred as a normal thing, and I thought teaching hatred from teachers was also normal. Peace was never an option. It was a sign of defeat and weakness. As the film showed, they filled our hearts with fear. They didn't go right away to hatred. They filled our hearts with fear from Jews. And that made hatred comes easy. And then it made terrorism tolerated and even encouraged. Who wouldn't want to kill monsters? Expectations and pressure on Palestinians from surrounding Arab countries was extremely high. To fight Israel and never accept peace. I realized that when Arabs were controlling Gaza and the West Bank. Those who wanted peace among the Palestinians were called by Arab countries traitors. My father was eventually killed by Israel in a targeted assassination in Gaza City in '56. I was 8 years old. In Nasser's famous speech to nationalize the Suez Canal, he hailed my father as a national hero, as he did. He vowed to take revenge, and he never mentioned the reason why Israel killed my father. He never mentioned the heavy toll of death and destruction that was caused by his Fidayeen. My siblings and I were asked by top government officials in Egypt after my father's death, which one of you will avenge your father's blood by killing Jews? They asked us. We looked at each other, myself and my siblings. We were speechless. We were mourning for our father's death. We didn't want to be told, go kill Jews. When the West Bank and Gaza were in Arab hands, its infrastructure, economy were neglected by all the Arab world. They used the two regions simply as launching grounds for war and terror against Israel. Is it any wonder why the Arabs of the West Bank and Gaza line up for work not on the borders of Egypt, not on the borders of Saudi Arabia or Jordan? They line up to work on Israel, on the border with Israel, the very country the Arabs tell them to terrorize. While the West was helping finance the economy of the two regions, Arab money was spared to finance terror. The West should never finance, support Hamas. It has now become convenient to blame today's worldwide Islamic terrorism on the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. But what about the terrorism against Israel that I had witnessed as a child, and it happened before the '67 war and before the occupation. It was the placement of the United Nations forces after the '56 war that stopped the Fedayeen. After my father's death, my mother had to face life alone with 5 children in Cairo, in a culture that gave respect only to families headed by a man. Arab women are expected to sacrifice their families by giving up their husbands and sons for martyrdom. Conditions have even gotten worse for Arab women, who are now expecting to give respect, stature to themselves only if they even themselves engage in jihad, not merely to celebrate their sons' and husbands' deaths, but they are encouraged to leave their own babies and go kill Jews. What kind of society have we become? What kind of society would give its mothers of babies who explode themselves to kill for the sake of killing non-Muslims? I lived for 30 years in the Middle East, in despotic dictatorships and police states under Nasser. I lived through the '56 war, the '67 war, and the '73 war, and all in between. And but tyranny and wars don't end up with Israel. Muslims were silenced and forced to look the other way when Muslims tortured and terrorized other Muslims. I witnessed honor killing of girls, and I know personally a girl who was killed because she was raped at age 16. I witnessed oppression of women, Muslim women, female genital mutilation, and polygamy, and its devastating effects on family dynamics. And here we see some Western countries who want to bring Sharia law and polygamy to the West. It took me many years to change, and it wasn't easy. I realized I was indoctrinated with propaganda of lies, hate, and fear. But one experience in particular changed my outlook on Israel. It showed Israel's compassion and competence. 10 years ago, my brother suffered a stroke in Gaza City and was not expected to survive. He was unconscious. The Egyptians around him asked, "Where do we take him now? Cairo Hospital or Hadassah Hospital?" Each and every one around him said, if you want him to live, take him to Hadassah. In time of crisis, I truly believe that Arabs trust Jews. They trust their expertise and compassion. I thank the Israeli government, doctors and nurses of Hadassah, for choosing the higher moral ground and for doing the right thing. I hear some today say, and some even Jewish people say, if only the state of Israel was not established in 1948, we would see the Jews in the Middle East live in harmony and peace with Muslims. But how can the people who believe in this explain why Christians, Armenians, Greeks, and other minorities have also been driven out and discriminated against in the Middle East after the World War II and after the departure of the colonial powers, the British and the French? If Israel was the cause, how come all others have left? Even the Coptic Christians of Egypt, who are the original Egyptians before Islam even came to Egypt, they are being persecuted. And are leaving Egypt in droves, in large numbers. In Arab culture, multiculturalism and diversity is not a value as it is in the West. As a matter of fact, it's a source of shame. We learn that non-Muslims are desecration. Their existence on Muslim land is a desecration, a kind of occupation, just by mere existence. Jews and Christians cannot safely practice their religion in Muslim Middle East countries. On April 20th, the Times of London reported that Muslim students in London are being taught to despise unbelievers, meaning non-Muslims, as filth. When I heard this, I remembered immediately the word negus, which we, in the Arab world, called the Copts of Egypt. Blue bone, we call them. Meanwhile, multiculturalism in the West has become a disease. We've taken it too far and turned it into exactly what it was not supposed to accomplish. We are, in the West, tolerating intolerance. We are tolerating hatred. We are tolerating people who hate us and who live among us. Muslims in the West demand tolerance, though, and no profiling, and not to be judged by the actions of the terrorists. But Muslims do not apply the same principles themselves to the West. When one Danish cartoonist offended them, they blamed all of Denmark and even demanded an apology from the Danish government. They even blamed the West. There was a contest in retaliation. In Iran, there was a contest to get Holocaust cartoons. And what does the Holocaust have to do with the Danish cartoonist? I don't know. The golden rule of treat others the way you want to be treated does not apply when it comes to radical Islam. They feel it's within their right to offend other religions in Muslim land, but they don't see the double standard. Some Muslim critics say that the film encourages hatred of Muslims. When I was in Canada speaking, there was a few articles by Canadians and by the Muslim society in Canada. They said that it's very offensive. They regard us, Arab critics and reformists, critics of terrorism, as the problem. But we're not the problem. We are speaking the truth and are calling for reformation from the welfare, for the welfare of everybody. It is the terrorists and their many defenders who are giving Islam a bad name. It's not the reformists who are hurting Islam's image. It is the terrorists, and that's what I told some of the Muslims in the audience. They expect us, after 9/11, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, to stick our heads in the sand and defend the indefensible. Will our denial bring sympathy and appreciation of Muslims? We must be in the front lines of the war on terror to be credible. If we want to be credible, Muslims will be more respected when we look after our own moral conduct, and not when we pretend that the problem of Islamic terrorism does not exist. First, the Holocaust denial, and now jihad denial. Where is our credibility? Mosque-goers, Muslims, the good Muslims, the moderate Muslims, must require better from their preachers. They must reform their mosques. Many Muslims in America and many Muslims don't go to mosques because of the hate speech that they encounter when they go there. We must ask reformation from our teachers, from our politicians, from our media. Reformation will not come easy. Muslims themselves must fight for it. Enough is enough. Terrorism is the warfare of desperate people. Arabs should not be desperate. They need to be grateful for many blessings, land from the Atlantic to the Persian Gulf, and huge wealth from oil. They don't have a shortage of land. They have a shortage of freedom and tolerance. Terrorism is the lowest form of warfare. It's not a sign of strength, but a sign of a decay, a culture in turmoil and contradictions. A culture that's trying to hide its failures by finger pointing, blaming others, and destroying the competition. In this dynamic, Israel has become the most useful enemy, the scapegoat. That's why the current state of Islam is not as powerful as some might think. Anyone can have temporary power through terrorism. Reformation and peace must be pursued as a value from within the Muslim world. That's why Israel's fence must remain stronger and higher during this very dangerous transition. After 9/11, I did a lot of soul searching. I did a lot of jihad, the peaceful jihad. Terrorism is not just hurting the West and Israel, but most of all, it's also destroying the moral fabric and goodness that I know exists in Arab culture and in Islam. I speak out of empathy for Israel, a country that deserves our respect and not our hatred and terror. I now support Israel because it's the right thing to do. Being pro-Israel does not mean anti-Arab. We can support both if truly our common goal is peace. I get very discouraged when the media call terrorists freedom fighters. They think they are championing the underdog. But terrorists are not the underdog. They are brainwashed killers and murderers. And they represent the hope. They do not represent the hope of the future of the Middle East, but they represent the oppressive, dark past of the Middle East. They are the hidden hands of tyrannical and despotic regimes who want to turn back the clock and keep Muslim women in bondage and keep Muslim men under the authority of the tyranny. The true freedom fighters are the brave, moderate Arab voices who risk their life and speak from inside the Arab world. Advocating peace with Israel, advocating democracy and freedom, and many of them right now are in Arab jails. The freedom fighters, are the Iraqi voters who defied the terrorists and went and voted. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, the freedom fighters are the people of Israel. I am in awe at your resilience. You are the silent heroes who go about the business of living, riding buses, working, creating, and contributing to the world, and above all, maintaining your democracy and moral standards, despite of the hatred, terror, war, and boycott for 58 years. The world must advocate that. It must be God's protective hands over Israel. That you survived all of what I've seen from the other side of the fence. You are an inspiration and a blessing in this region. And to conclude, Israel should not be criticized for creating a physical fence to protect its citizens, and then they call it apartheid state. We Arabs have been surrounding you with an ugly psychological war of hatred, boycott, and an us against them attitude for many decades. It is time for the Arab psychological wall. We have a psychological wall surrounding you. It's time for this wall to come down in order for your physical wall to become unnecessary. The way the Jews have been treated by my culture is tragic and a disgrace. In today's world, no people should be called infidels, and no group of people should be called enemies of God by any religion. I long for the day when Muslim preachers promote peace and tolerance. They will serve their people and their God best by being a source of comfort, wisdom, and hope. They will bring back half of the Muslim population who don't go to mosques, who have practically are not practicing anything. We need to start having the religion back of tolerance and peace. By dialogue, by building bridges with Jews and Christians in the Middle East. Muslim scholars say Islam is a religion of peace. Then let us teach peace and forgiveness from the mosques and from the pulpits of mosques. I have forgiven Israel for the death of my father. And I hope and I know that Israel is capable of forgiving us, forgiving the Fidayeen, and forgiving the Arab world for the antisemitism and hatred and terror. Let us extend the famous Arab generosity to welcome you in our region as neighbors, as an asset in the region, and not as an enemy. Thank you very much.
I wish I would be in a position to appoint you tonight as a guardian of Zion. And I certainly hope there is a God of Israel who will also extend his protection to you.
All I need is a blessing from Zion.
You have it. Well, now is the time to open a debate. Just before we do that, I did, out of curiosity, want to hear something from you about your recent visit to Canada, because in the context of this conference that we just had about multiculturalism, Canada unfortunately was overlooked, although it's probably the only state in the world that made multiculturalism not only its official policy but an integral part of its national identity. And yet, we saw what the Ontario Union of Public Employees said about Israel. We saw the homegrown Canadian bombers, 5 of them teenagers, Muslims, who were arrested with the intention of storming the Canadian Parliament and maybe beheading the Prime Minister of Canada. And when you visited Winnipeg, this film was shown, and you already alluded in passing to it, that immediately the local Muslims, but also Canadians, even professors, said this is a film which encourages the hate of Muslims, goes against the multicultural wonderland of Canada, of harmony and understanding, etc., etc. What actually was your experience there in that context? And how did you deal with it?
Actually, I always welcome Arabs to speak to me and Muslims because through dialogue we are going to change. But through silencing us, we cannot change. So I have no problem with them accusing me of hate, promoting hatred against Muslims. I told the Muslims. There were very few Muslims in the audience, by the way. They didn't come and watch the film. Probably nobody watched the film. But just by the idea that it speaks about radical Islam, then they get offended. See, why should you get offended by the movie? Number one, you are the ones who should be in the front line of the war on terror. You should be the ones who weed out the terrorists from within you, because they are the ones who are giving Islam a bad name. It's not me who's giving Islam a bad name. It's the terrorists who were just arrested in Canada who's scaring the Canadians from Islam, not the film. So this is my point that I make to my Arab brothers and sisters and Muslim brothers and sisters. For them, to stick our heads in the sand and pretend that nothing's wrong with our culture right now, the Muslim culture right now, then we're in denial. We have to admit, and there's nothing wrong in saying we have a problem. All other religions went through periods of reformation. There isn't one country around the world who didn't go through a period of reformation. So this Arab pride of we don't want to admit we have a problem is really immature. And we should rise up to the occasion and admit we have a problem and solve it. Solve it with other nations. There's nothing wrong with that. And about Canada, it's amazing. After they did this article, attacked me and attacked the movie, the terrorists, this plot was found out. Who gave Islam a bad name here? The movie or the terrorists? And that's my message. That's very simple. Canada is amazingly appeasing radical Muslims to the extent that they were actually considering bringing a Sharia law to Canada. Sharia law is Islamic law, and especially it's very oppressive of women. And to bring that to Canada, even to consider it, was an outrage. The reason is there are Arab feminists who are trying to modify Sharia law in the Arab world. Lo and behold, they're going to modify it in the Arab world and then find it, in Canada. It is unbelievable even to consider it because, first of all, Sharia law allows polygamy. It allows beating of women, wives. It allows a lot of oppressive laws against women. And it's extremely radical. And for even Canada to consider it, I was heartbroken just by the idea. And I thank God that Canada found it incompatible with Western democracy.
Thank you. Yes, you. Brief.
I really have to congratulate you. I know that you've done a wonderful job all over, but I'd like to ask you, this audience doesn't have to be convinced. The fact that we are here, we believe your message. What I would like to ask you is how do you counter certain Muslims who call this area Dar al-Islam,
Thank you.
How do you...
Then I tell them my story, and I tell them that I witnessed as a child terrorism from Egypt against Israel. Egypt and Jordan, excuse me, can I have some? It's not just Egypt and Jordan because of the geographical location of Egypt and Jordan. It's the whole Arab world. It's the Arab League, 22 Arab countries will punish any Arab country who attempts peace with Israel. And so liberal Jews hear me speak, and I'm happy to say that in the United States, a few of them came to me and said, "You changed me completely."
I'm happy to hear that too. Yes.
Can we get the rest of the answer, please? About Occupy, how she answers about Occupy too. Did she answer?
Yeah, she did the very first sentence.
I think she answered that. Yeah, please.
I just want to thank you very much for coming here tonight, and it's been a real pleasure to work with your daughter, Shireen, in the Israel project and making Israel's image look good. A short story. On the way here, we were driving from West Jerusalem. We had Hadar taxis and a driver named Ayad of Abu Dis. Now, he was, of course, upset about a wall dividing his own property, but at the same time, he understood the jihad, and he went to study in the U.S. for the past 20 years, and he understood Israeli tolerance. Not only does he work in Israel, but his son goes to hand-in-hand academy in Katamon, where he can study English and Hebrew, which are the languages of more tolerant societies. Just want to say that you're not alone. And as we approach the hill to the Truman Center, we looked down on the Judean desert, and we saw these minarets in the small villages, and we wondered how many of these minarets are moderate, and how many of these minarets are extreme. So I just wanted to say thank you for coming, but before Israel leaves these territories, we must look at what's going on inside these mosques. Good night.
Exactly. Please tell your friend, the driver, to join Arabs for Israel. Send me an email.
Yeah. David Lippman.
Thank you. Two things. One question, but just to say that the other day we went to the Variety Center here in Jerusalem, taking care of handicapped children, my wife and I, with my daughter. And we were amazed of the 400 children being treated who were handicapped mentally. 30% were Orthodox Jews, 30% were Arabs from East Jerusalem, and 40% were neither one nor the other. And to see how the Jewish musicians with two Muslim girls, one of whom had a hijab, were dealing with the handicapped Muslim children together, playing music, it was an inspiration. And I wanted to just mention that before I ask you the question which concerns the United Nations, where we have the defamation of Islam, or it became the defamation of religions, a resolution passed by the Commission on Human Rights in 1999, and since then we tried desperately, the Association for World Education and other NGOs, to push through one sentence that all violence in the name of religion or any call to kill in the name of God or Allah should be condemned. Although the Saudis said it was a good idea, the 56 Muslim countries, the Organization of the Islamic Conference, which had sponsored that resolution since 1999, for 3 years have not been able to push that through or did not want to. Can you explain to us, and I asked Professor Tibi the same question last night, why it is that such a simple request does not receive an answer from 56 Muslim, Arab 22, and the Muslim ambassadors at the Commission on Human Rights at the United Nations in Geneva?
The reason is very simple. It's very normal because it goes straight against jihad. And it's the core of Islam. That's how they view it. Rightly or wrongly. I mean, jihad could be interpreted as an inner struggle. I'm not talking about the interpretation of jihad, but they view jihad as a war against the infidels. So if you get a law, an international law, condemning basically jihad against the infidels, then 55 Muslim countries will be outlawed in the United Nations, and it's obvious why. it's not only that law, it should be a crime against humanity. And they don't want that. They reject that because part of, in their conscious, in their mind, whether rightly or wrongly again, crimes against Jews and non-Muslims is legitimate. So it's not a crime against humanity in their mind, and that's the tragedy. And not only that, in the United Nations, a few decades ago, there was a law that was trying to be passed, but was turned down as a result of Arab pressure to state that people have a choice to change their religion. And it was watered down and ended flat on its face in the United Nations. And the reason this was because, again, in the minds of radical Muslims, and in the minds of many Muslims, really, people who leave Islam should be killed, like this Afghan man. The courts in the Arab world and in some radical Muslim countries really can condemn a man to death or a woman to death because they left Islam. And the United Nations, until today, being manipulated by over 50 Muslim countries, cannot dare state that the religious rights of human beings should be to choose their own religion.
If you were invited. Sorry, young man.
Yes, I would come.
When we talk about radical Islam and their wish to kill non-believers and to make them submit to Islam, but wouldn't you agree that mainstream Islam agrees almost unanimously that martyrdom operations in Israel or in Palestine are legitimate?
Yeah, a lot of, actually when I speak on college campuses in the United States against terrorism, and I call them terrorists. And then I see a couple of radical Muslim students telling me, you shouldn't call them terrorists, and especially the ones in Israel, these are freedom fighters. And then I tell them, no, they are terrorists. Anybody who kills innocent civilians is a terrorist, and if you want to get hurt Israel, go into a war. Say, okay, here's my army, and I fight your army. This is a war. But going into cities and terrorizing innocent civilians, this is cowardice. This is being a coward, and it's an insult to Islam. It's an insult to any religion, really. And I don't understand how they can tolerate it in the name of Islam.
Yeah,
two short questions. One, besides the story with your brother, what made you, quotation marks, see the light? And two, are you not afraid to speak out for your personal safety?
I'm afraid. I was more afraid 10 years ago after my brother, this happened to my brother. I was a journalist, and I wanted to write an article in favor of Israel after what happened to my brother. And I felt scared, and I didn't do it out of fear. So that part I am afraid. But 9/11 was that's it, the straw that broke the camel back. I love America. America gave me freedom that I could never have where I was born. It gave me dignity. It gave me a beautiful home. I have so much to thank America for. And now it's time for me to pay back after 9/11 as an American citizen. I pledged allegiance to the United States flag. And I owe it to America to speak out. As to how I changed gradually, there was another story. When I was only 20 years old, I was in Cairo visiting a Coptic Christian girl in Egypt. And she lived very close to a radical mosque. And it was Friday, so we heard the sermon on the loudspeakers. And as usual, I hear the same cursing in the mosques, cursing. And they call it prayer. And I looked at her eyes, and I heard, we were talking, and I heard the preacher say, may God destroy the Jews and the infidels, the enemies of God. We are not to make treaties with them, and we are not to befriend them. And at that time, it was, I think, it was after the 73 war, and Sadat was considering peace, you know, and it was addressed to people who were considering, and the Arabs who were considering peace with Israel, and infidels. And I looked at my friend's eyes. We were early 20s. I looked at her eyes and I saw fear. And suddenly the prayers that I always heard as normal became embarrassing for me. I felt ashamed of the way, not from my religion, because books don't commit terrorism, people do. And I suddenly felt ashamed from the way Islam is being taught. And it made me aware for the first time that it hurts other religion. And that's how I started. And of course, my father's death and the glorification of jihad and shaheed. I loved my father dearly, and just by him being taken away from me because of jihad. And people used to come to us and say, oh, your father is in heaven now, and it's beautiful, he's enjoying heaven. And I said, I don't want heaven, I want my father back. And so I rejected inside me something told me, I don't like jihad, and I don't like jihad. So there was already, before I went to the United States. I went to the United States, and then my change started happening, because I had a curious mind. I wanted to know the truth for myself. I befriended a lot of Jewish people because we were alike. We had very similar cultures. And when I was around my Jewish friends, even when they were not realizing I was among them, when it was a big group, I would hear the word compassion, forgiveness, tolerance. What can we do to have peace with the Arabs, da, 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 da. And when I was with my Arab friends alone, I would hear things about jihad. We will never have peace with Israel. We have to destroy Israel. Just hatred. And then when I was alone by myself, I said, now I know who wants peace and who doesn't want peace. It became obvious to me who really wants peace and who's afraid of even speaking out and saying peace. And then, of course, the straw that broke the camel's back was 9/11. Right before 9/11, I was visiting Egypt for the first time in 20 years. And I visited Egypt, and I was stunned by radical Islam has taken over. There are Saudi mosques in Cairo, King Fahd Mosque, in this mosque, and this wasn't there before. The bearded people are leaving. Most of the women are covered up from head to toe. And I said, this is not the Egypt I left. When I left Egypt, we were wearing mini skirts. What happened? And I saw unemployment in Egypt, garbage along the Nile River, unemployment, poverty is getting worse. And then I opened Egyptian newspapers, and all I see is Israel bashing and West bashing. And I'm like, don't they see what their problems are, where their priorities are here? And then I went back home to Los Angeles on September 10th at night, 2001, with my kids. I woke up in the morning and I saw the second airplane hit in between. And when I saw this, I said to myself, my husband was there. I started crying and said, sweetheart, jihad has come to America. The jihad I left behind is here. I can't be silent anymore. I have to speak out. And that's how it's. And what I'm doing now was never planned. It just happened.
About 5 more minutes. Yes, sir. You've been waiting for a while.
My name is Ari Rat. Of course, I want to commend Noni Darwish very much. One of the main things that this film is lacking is the not more Noni Darwish I mean
There are more.
What I mean by that is that there should have been much more confrontation with voices, Islamic voices of reason, rational Islamic clergy, or at least there are voices like that. And I'm afraid, and please, nothing personal, Robert Wistrich, I appreciate very much your knowledge, and I'm an avid listener to your lectures. But I believe, actually I'm convinced, that this overdone parallel with Hitler, Nazi, is misguided. Excuse me, this is my observation, okay?
That's it. That's okay.
You say that, okay. Everybody going
excuse me.
all right?
That's fine. Do you have a question? Do you have a question?
This discussion, I think.
No, the point's clear, but do you have a question?
All right. Only voices of total dissent. My humble opinion is that this film catalogue should be re-edited. It is repetitious. It is a very important message which gets lost by somewhat misguided comparison and repeated messages. And this is a great thing.
Well, perhaps I will let you also answer that. But first of all, I'm not running away from your question. I totally disagree with you. But I'm not the director of the film. I fully subscribe to it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have put my name on it as a historical advisor. I think that there are dangers, obvious ones, regarding going too far with these parallels. But I think you're dead wrong about the fundamental point in which the parallels are drawn. And they are drawn by, first of all, by all the Arab speakers in this film. And they speak from within, just like Nonie Darwish. They know from their own experience. And everything you've heard, which you're disregarding, because don't try and create a false antithesis between what she has said and some kind of artificial parallel that's been imposed. Every Arab speaker not merely endorsed it, perhaps went even further than I myself might go as a historian. But the parallels are there, and they become more striking over time rather than less so. I mean, we're living in the time this film's final editing took place before President I can never pronounce his name probably just as well. You know who I mean. Before he started making his statements, which simply underline the point of the parallel, which is above all the indoctrination of youth, the way in which a totalitarian ideology can take over an entire generation and distort, and the techniques of propaganda, the conspiracy theories, the violent anti-Semitism, and I could go on and on. Not all the parallels are drawn. Now, you may disagree with it, but I think that you, given your experience, are in denial. I'm sorry to say that, but I'd like to hear what...
I have respect for your opinion. But my message is also for the Jewish people. They have suffered a lot. Who wants to just come out of a war where they were practically almost exterminated, just to find themselves in a situation where there's another Hitler coming? There is another Hitler. And it's in radical Islam. It's not Muslim, the Muslims' culture, but I am speaking from knowledge from within. And this is the truth. It's very dangerous for the Jewish people now. And they have to unite. It's very sad. But you're not the only ones who are threatened by radical Islam. I'm getting emails from within Egypt, from the moderates and educated people in Egypt. who are telling me they are scared to death because they feel that the Muslim Brotherhood is about to take over. And if the Muslim Brotherhood takes over, the peace treaty with Israel is going to be over. And we have to understand that Egypt is 75 million strong. And if you were lucky, once or twice, I don't know what can happen if you weaken. It's better to presume the worst than, I'm not telling Israel go bomb the Arab world. Please don't misunderstand my message. But don't be in denial. The West is in denial. And I love my people. And that's why I'm speaking out. It is very dangerous. The situation for the Jewish people is very... And when I arrive in Israel, I feel how tiny the country is. How the geography of this country is the size of New Jersey. Can you believe the people of New Jersey, the whole United States is against them? This is exactly the whole United States represents the Arab world, and New Jersey is Israel. And if we would not aware, we'd be crushed. We'd be crushed. And there's more. And it's not just the Arab world now, it's the Muslim world. Iran is joining the crowd because it pays off to have Israel as your enemy. It distracts your people from the tyranny you're doing. So Ahmad Jirjal, that's his name, he found out that Arab dictators are successful in keeping their position by pointing out at Israel. And that's what he's doing because he's in trouble. And I understand. Just by being Israel, I feel that right now, I am surrounded by hate. Terrible hate and terrible aggression. And if they were as powerful as the Germans, if they are at the level of technology of Germany, I guarantee you that the Holocaust would have happened a long time ago. I'm sorry.
I'm very worried. Iran is not going to qualify for the next round of the Mondial, and I feel that the situation is going to get worse. Anyway, I take two more questions. Yes.
Try to be very brief in view of the time. First of all, I think I speak for the whole audience if I congratulate you and thank you, all the courageous people who made this film. It's really very, very impressive. It's also a very disturbing film, as you know, as in fact our chairman had warned us before we saw the film, and it's very moving, very disturbing, but it's a very, very important one. I would like to mention the name of one person who might have been interviewed in this film. That's Bernard Lewis. And Bernard Lewis, who spoke in this very room just not too long ago, a few months ago, last year, whatever, he said he had written an article just not too long ago, maybe 2002, I think it was, which is called The Roots of Arab Rage, in which it's a complicated article which I don't want to summarize just very in this short time. But one of the clues, the psychological clues, which is my field in this film, is when one of the Islamist fanatics says, "We ruled the world before, we shall rule it again." Now, this is a fantasy. The Arabs never ruled the whole world. There was in the Middle Ages, of course, the great time of the Arab flowering of Arab culture. There were leaders in mathematics, medicine, and so on. This is very well known. But they never ruled the whole world. And in fact, even the so-called Arab Empire was divided into many different parts. There were different caliphates. I don't need to tell this educated audience all this history. The first jihad was really in the 7th century, when the Muslim Arabs came from Saudi Arabia and conquered the whole Middle East and North Africa, and in the beginning of the 8th century into Spain. But that was the limit. I mean, they didn't conquer all of Europe. They were stopped, as everyone knows, by the Christians.
Adna, would you like to ask Nonie?
No, I don't want to ask a question. I'm sorry. This is a comment, but I'll make it very brief.
Now, so to summarize Bernard Lewis, the Arabs, as the way I see it at least, is that the Arabs have not been able to mourn those historical losses, which in their fantasy they suffered in 1492, if you like, or 1685, or whenever those very important dates when they were pushed away, pushed out, and lost their glory. But this is a fantasy. This is the inability to mourn on a collective level. They cannot mourn their losses. Now, one last thing is just a word of caution. It's not to criticize anything that you've said. You've said very important and very true things, which I agree with. But there is a word of caution, and the word of caution is not to try not to divide the world into the bad guys and the good guys. This means you see the world in black and white, and that's a very dangerous thing, because then you do what the Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda are also doing, dividing the world into black and white. So I would say, for example, if you divide Islam into the good Islam and the bad Islamists, you're mistaken, because there are many varieties of Islam. If you ask 10 Muslims about Islam, they'll give you 10 different ideas what their Islam is. So it's dangerous to divide the world into black and white, and I would be very cautious about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There's only one thing about when you mentioned there's not enough. Actually, the film has a lot of people who spoke, just like I am, Brigitte Gabriel, Walid Shubal, and many others. There's also a wonderful lady, her name is Wafat Sultan, I'm sure if she was known when the movie was made, she would have joined us.
Yes, it was finished before she was.
Before she was. So
could I just ask Rachel Shaw, who's sitting up there, whether did you approach Bernard Lewis?
Yeah, we tried our best. We're not successful.
You're not successful, because I had nothing to do with who appeared in the film, so that I didn't know whether that was the case. Yeah, he wasn't available. Okay, fine. One last question, because you really,
I'll stay, and if anybody would like to talk to me.
Well, you can't stay too long, because we have to evacuate.
Okay. I'll be here tomorrow in the conference all day.
Right. Okay. Did you want to say something?
Concept in Judaism called tikkun olam. Do you know what that means? Well, that's what you do.
Mend the world.
Mending the world.
Thank you. I learned it from you, sweetheart. From the Jewish people.
And I
learned it from you.
I would like to give you the blessing of Jerusalem. And to pray and to ask you to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Because if there's peace in Jerusalem, there'll be peace in the world.
Well, on that note, I think we can conclude. Very good.